I spent 10 years building my wife's dream career. Then I found her exit strategy folder. A devoted husband works 2 jobs to put his wife through law school. Upon her graduation, he finds a digital folder containing divorce papers and a plan to hide assets before she leaves him for a senior partner. Part 1. The Weight of a Dream. The blue light of the laptop screen was the only thing illuminating our bedroom, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls I had painted myself 3 years ago. It was 2:14 a.m. Sarah was fast asleep beside me, her breathing rhythmic and shallow, the peaceful sleep of someone who had finally reached the summit. I stared at the file name on the screen until the letters began to blur. Project Sunrise. Exit strategy. When I first met Sarah, she was a waitress at a diner near the campus where I was finishing my degree in civil engineering. She had these eyes, bright, hungry, and restless. She didn't want to be carrying trays forever. She wanted to be the one making the laws, not just following them. I loved that hunger. I fell in love with the girl who studied LSAT prep books during her 15-minute breaks, her fingers stained with newsprint and cheap coffee. I made a promise to her on the night I proposed, sitting on a rusted park bench under a canopy of oak trees. "I will be your floor," I told her. "I'll be the solid ground you stand on so you can reach whatever you want." And for 10 years, I was. To put her through law school and support her during her unpaid clerkships, I worked my day job at the firm and took graveyard shifts as a freelance site inspector. I lived on adrenaline and lukewarm gas station coffee. I remember the winter of the second year specifically. The heater in our cramped apartment broke, and we couldn't afford to fix it. I gave her my only heavy coat to wear while she studied, while I sat at the kitchen table in 3 hoodies, my breath misting in the air, checking blueprints. I didn't mind. Every time she got an A, or every time she talked about the future us, the exhaustion vanished. We were a team. I was the engine and she was the star. By the time she graduated and landed a position at Miller, Vance & Thorne, one of the most prestigious firms in the city, I felt like we had both won. We bought the house she always wanted. I spent my weekends landscaping the garden, planting the hydrangeas she loved, and building a custom mahogany desk for her home office. "You're my hero, David," she'd say, wrapping her arms around me as I worked. "I couldn't have breathed without you." But over the last 6 months, the air in our home had changed. It became thin, cold. Sarah was working later and later. When she did come home, she was distant, her mind clearly orbiting a world I wasn't invited to. She spoke of senior partners and high-stakes litigation with a reverence she used to reserve for our anniversary plans. Specifically, she spoke of Julian Thorne, the Thorne in the firm's name. He was 50, silver-haired, and possessed the kind of effortless power that comes from never having to work 2 jobs to survive. Tonight, I had gone into her office to find a spare USB drive for a presentation I had in the morning. She had left her laptop open. She never left it open. I shouldn't have looked. I told myself it was just work folder, maybe a plan for her to leave the firm and start her own practice. Exit strategy. It sounded professional. I clicked. Inside weren't case files or deposition notes. There were spreadsheets. One was titled Project Sunrise, Exit Strategy. Inside weren't case files or deposition notes. There were spreadsheets. One was titled Asset Division, Hidden. It listed our joint savings, the equity in our home, and my own 401k. Next to them were notes in red: transfer to mother's account in increments, claim home repairs as personal debt, and downplay David's contribution to tuition, claim it as a gift. Underneath the spreadsheets was a PDF. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull, sickening thud. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My name was there. David Miller. Her name was there. Sarah Vance Miller. But it was the date on the draft that broke me. It was dated 3 months ago, the same week I had taken her to dinner to celebrate her first major win in court, the same night she had looked me in the eye, toasted to our long future, and told me she loved me more than life itself. I scrolled further down. There was a subfolder titled Correspondence. I opened the most recent one. It was an email draft addressed to Julian. The timeline is moving up. Once the bonus clears in December, the paper trail will be clean enough. I'm tired of playing the supportive wife to a man who doesn't understand the world I live in now. I'll be ready to move into the penthouse by the 15th. Thank you for being my North Star, Julian. I felt a coldness spread from my chest to my fingertips. The room felt like it was spinning, the walls I had painted myself closing in on me. The mahogany desk I had built with my own hands suddenly felt like a tombstone. I looked at the bed where she lay, her face peaceful, her skin glowing in the moonlight. She looked like the woman I sacrificed a decade for, but she wasn't. The woman I loved was a ghost, a character she played until she no longer needed the stage I provided. I didn't wake her. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the betrayal illuminating my face, and I realized that for 10 years, I hadn't been building a dream. I had been building a ladder, and now that she was at the top, she was preparing to kick it away. I reached for my own phone. My hands were steady now. The shock was being replaced by something else. A quiet, burning clarity. If she wanted an exit strategy, I would give her one, but it wouldn't be the one she had scripted. Part 2. The Mask and the Mirror. The sun rose that morning with a cruel indifference. I sat at the kitchen island, clutching a mug of coffee that had gone stone cold hours ago. When Sarah walked into the kitchen, she was the picture of professional grace. Her silk blouse pressed, her hair pulled back into a sleek, authoritative bun. She leaned over and kissed my cheek. It was a practiced gesture, light and fleeting, like a habit she was trying to break. "You're up early, Dave," she said, reaching for the kettle. "Big meeting at the site?" "Something like that," I managed to say. My voice felt like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I watched her move, marveling at how someone could look so radiant while harboring such a calculated betrayal. I was just thinking about that first year of law school. Remember how we lived on instant noodles and hope? Sarah paused, the kettle mid-air. A shadow flickered across her face. Not guilt, but a brief, annoyed flicker of memory, as if I were reminding her of a stain on an otherwise perfect garment. We've come a long way since then, haven't we? Anyway, I've got a massive deposition today. Julian needs me in early. Julian. The name tasted like copper in my mouth. "Of course," I said. "Don't let me keep you." As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, the silence of the house became deafening. I went back into her office. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but I needed more. I needed to see just how deep the rabbit hole went. I spent the next 4 hours mirroring her exit strategy folder onto an encrypted drive of my own. It wasn't just about the divorce. As I dug through the subfolders, I found the asset division spreadsheet was far more sinister than I'd realized. She had been funneling her bonuses, money she told me was being reinvested in the firm's holding pool, into a private account under her maiden name. She had even taken out a second mortgage on the house using a forged signature. My signature. She was setting me up to be left with the debt while she walked away with the equity, the savings, and a clean slate. I felt a surge of nausea. This wasn't just a woman who had fallen out of love. This was a predator who had spent years scouting the terrain. She viewed my devotion not as a gift, but as a resource to be depleted. I called my oldest friend, Marcus. He was a forensic accountant who had spent his career untangling the webs of corporate embezzlers. We met at a nondescript diner on the edge of town, far from the polished glass towers where Sarah and Julian spent their days. I laid the drive on the table between us. "I need you to look at this, Marcus. I need to know exactly where the money is." Marcus scrolled through the files, his expression hardening with every click. After 10 minutes, he looked up, his eyes filled with a pity that hurt more than the betrayal itself. "Dave, she's been planning this for at least 18 months. The offshore transfers, the shell company for the consulting fees. She didn't just want to leave you. She wanted to erase you. Can we trace it?" I asked. "Most of it, but there's something else. Look at these emails between her and Julian Thorne. They aren't just talking about their future. They're discussing a specific case, the Sterling Development Project. I knew that project. It was a massive municipal contract my firm had been bidding on. Sarah had asked me dozens of questions about our internal cost estimates and our safety protocols over dinner a few months back. I thought she was just interested in my work, She gave him your firm's proprietary data, Dave. Thorne's brother owns the competing firm. They used your information to undercut your company's bid. That's why she got that performance bonus in October. It wasn't a bonus. It was a kickback. The room felt like it was tilting. She hadn't just stolen our future. She had used my own hard work to sabotage my career. She had stood in our kitchen, toasted to my success, and then handed the blueprints of my downfall to her lover. I didn't go home that afternoon. I drove to the site of the new bridge I was supervising. I stood on the edge of the concrete expanse, looking down at the churning river below. For 10 years, I had built things, structures meant to last, foundations meant to hold. I realized then that Sarah was a structure built on sand, and I was the one who poured the water. But I wasn't going to jump, and I wasn't going to beg. A cold, surgical calm settled over me. Sarah was a lawyer. She played by the rules of the court, but she forgot that I was an engineer. I knew how to find the structural weakness in any design. I knew that if you remove the right bolt at the right time, even the grandest tower comes crashing down. I stayed at the site until the sun began to set, watching the workers pack up their tools. I thought about the exit strategy folder. She wanted a clean break. She wanted to walk into her new life with Julian, leaving me in the rubble of the life I had built for her. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It was an old contact from my days in the union. A man who knew exactly how to make sure lost documents found their way to the right desks. "Hey Frank," I said, my voice steady. "I have something that belongs to the district attorney's office, and I think they're going to be very interested in the Sterling development project." That night when I returned home, Sarah was waiting for me. She was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine, the fire crackling in the hearth. She looked soft, approachable. "You're late, honey," she said, her voice like honey. "I missed you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the predator beneath the silk. I smiled back, a hollow, perfect imitation of the man she thought I still was. "I missed you too, Sarah, more than you know." Part 3. The Cold Geometry of Revenge. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in atmospheric pressure. I lived in a house that felt like a stage set, performing the role of the doting, slightly tired husband, while my pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs every time Sarah's phone chimed. I watched her. I watched the way she checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, smoothing a stray hair with a look of predatory satisfaction. She was already living in the penthouse in her mind. I was just a piece of furniture she hadn't managed to sell yet. Marcus called me from a burner phone on a Tuesday afternoon. "Dave, I've mapped the flow. She didn't just take the bonuses. She's been using your electronic signature to authorize consulting fees from your personal business account into a shell company called SV Consulting. It's classic embezzlement disguised as marital expenses. If she files those divorce papers and you don't have this proof, the court will see those transfers as your spending. She's framing you for draining the marital assets herself." I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of my office window. The sheer cruelty of it was breathtaking. She wasn't just leaving. She was ensuring I'd be too legally and financially crippled to ever chase her. "And the Sterling development files?" I asked. "The digital breadcrumbs are there," Marcus confirmed. "She accessed your firm's server from your home IP address on 3 separate nights in October. Then, an hour later, she sent encrypted attachments to Julian Thorne's private email. It's corporate espionage, Dave. This isn't just a divorce anymore. It's a felony." I thanked him and hung up. I had enough. I had the blueprints of her betrayal, and I knew exactly where the load-bearing walls were. That Friday, Sarah told me she had to go to a legal retreat in the mountains for the weekend. I knew better. I'd seen the calendar invite on her synced tablet, a reservation for 2 at a boutique hotel downtown under the name Thorne. "Have a productive trip, Sarah," I said, kissing her forehead. "You've worked so hard for this." "I have," she said, her voice devoid of irony. "I really have." As soon as her taillights faded down the street, I went to work. I didn't pack a bag for myself. Instead, I sat at her mahogany desk, the one I had built with pride and blisters, and I began to print. I printed the spreadsheets Marcus had untangled. I printed the emails to Julian. I printed the photos Marcus's private investigator had taken of Sarah and Julian entering a luxury apartment building hand in hand while I was pulling a double shift at the construction site. Then I did something Sarah never expected. I didn't call a divorce lawyer. Not yet. I called the managing partner of Miller, Vance, and Thorne, the man above Julian. His name was Arthur Miller, no relation to me, a lion of the old guard who valued the firm's reputation above all else. I told him I had documents regarding the Sterling development bid that were accidentally sent to my home office. I told him I was concerned about internal leaks that might jeopardize the firm's standing with the city council. He agreed to meet me at a quiet coffee shop within the hour. When I walked in, Arthur looked at me with the polite condescension of a man who makes 7 figures looking at a man in a work jacket. But as I laid the first set of emails on the table, the ones showing Sarah handing over our firm's proprietary cost estimates to Julian's brother, his face went from pale to a dangerous mottled purple. This is a violation of every ethics clause in their contracts, Arthur whispered, his hands shaking slightly. This could disbar them both. It could sink our municipal standing for a decade. I'm not looking for a payoff, Mr. Miller, I said, my voice low and steady. I'm an engineer. I believe in structural integrity. My wife and Julian Thorne have a strategy to exit their current lives and leave a lot of wreckage behind. I just thought you'd like to see the demolition plan before the building falls on you. Arthur looked at me, really looking at the simple husband for the first time. What do you want, David? I want the truth to be the only thing left standing, I replied. I spent the rest of the weekend meticulously moving my things out of the house. I didn't take much, just my tools, my clothes, and a few mementos before law school, before the hunger took her over. I left the exit strategy folder open on her laptop in the center of the kitchen island, but I added a new document to the top of the list. It was titled Project Sunset, the Countermeasure. Inside was a single page listing the names of the people I had spoken to, the district attorney, the ethics committee of the state bar, and Arthur Miller. On Sunday night, I sat in my new, small apartment, a place Sarah didn't know existed. I had a single lamp on, the room smelling of fresh paint and wood shavings. My phone was on the table in front of me. At 9 p.m., it began to vibrate. It wasn't a call. It was a flurry of texts. David, where are you? What is this? What did you do? Answer me right now. Then the final one, sent at 9:45 p.m. The police are at the door. David, please tell them it's a mistake. I didn't reply. I watched the phone glow in the dark, a tiny beacon of justice in a room that finally felt like home. Part 4. The dust settles. The silence that followed the silencing of my phone was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I sat in that small, rented apartment, staring at the white walls, waiting for the surge of triumph I thought would come, but it didn't. Instead, there was only a hollow, heavy stillness. I felt like a man who had successfully performed a controlled demolition on his own heart. The fallout was swifter than even I had anticipated. On Monday morning, while I was at a new job site, a bridge restoration project that required the kind of honest structural integrity I could finally trust, my phone pinged with a news alert. Top litigation firm rocked by ethics scandal. The article didn't name Sarah or Julian yet, but it spoke of internal investigations into municipal bidding irregularities. By noon, the whispers had become a roar. Arthur Miller hadn't hesitated. To save the firm, he had to cut the rod out immediately. Julian Thorne was retiring effective immediately, and Sarah Vance Miller had been placed on administrative leave pending an inquiry by the state bar. I didn't have to wait long for the confrontation. I knew Sarah would find me. She was a hunter. She knew how to track a scent. She showed up at the construction site at 4 p.m. She wasn't wearing the silk power suit anymore. She looked frayed, her eyes rimmed with red, her hair windswept in a way that looked frantic rather than styled. She didn't look like a high-powered attorney. She looked like a woman who had realized the floor she was standing on was actually a trapdoor. "How could you, David?" she hissed, her voice trembling as we stood by the chain-link fence, the sound of jackhammers providing a jagged soundtrack to our final conversation. 10 years. We were a team. You ruined my life over a few files? I looked at her, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't see the woman I needed to protect. I saw a stranger. I didn't ruin your life, Sarah. I just stopped holding up the ceiling while you tried to set the house on fire. I was doing it for us, she lied, the desperation leaking through the cracks in her voice. The money, the connections. I was building a future where we wouldn't have to struggle anymore. There was no us in your exit strategy folder, Sarah, I said quietly. There was Julian. There was the penthouse. There was the plan to leave me with the debt of the very education that gave you the tools to betray me. You didn't just want to leave. You wanted to bury me. She flinched. The lie died in her throat. For a second, the mask dropped entirely, and I saw the cold, calculating woman who had typed those spreadsheets at 2 a.m. You think you've won, she spat. I'll fight this. I'm a lawyer, David. I'll make sure you get nothing. The house, the savings, I'll tie you up in court for a decade. You forgot one thing, Sarah, I said, stepping closer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an engineer. I don't care about winning the argument. I care about the foundation. And your foundation? It's gone. The district attorney has the logs of your access to my firm's server. Arthur Miller has your emails to Julian. And the state bar? They have the records of the shell company you used to embezzle our joint funds. I paused, letting the weight of it sink in. You're not going to tie me up in court, Sarah. You're going to be too busy trying to stay out of prison. And as for the house, I've already filed for an emergency injunction based on the fraud you committed with my signature. You aren't going back there tonight. The locks have already been changed. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. The power dynamic that had defined our marriage, the brilliant rising star and her simple provider, had inverted in a single heartbeat. David, please, she whispered, her voice finally breaking. I have nowhere to go. Julian won't even take my calls. His wife found out. He's blocked me. I felt a twinge of the old empathy, the reflex to fix things for her that had been hardwired into me for 10 years. But then I remembered the smell of the cold kitchen at 2 a.m. I remembered the Project Sunrise folder. You have your exit strategy, Sarah. I suggest you start using it. I walked back towards the bridge, the sound of my boots on the gravel firm and steady. I didn't look back. I had spent 10 years building a dream for someone else. Now, for the first time in my life, I was going to build something for myself. Part 5. The Architecture of a New Life. The months that followed were a blur of legal documents and quiet evenings. The divorce didn't take 10 years, it took 6 months of cold, hard facts. When the state bar began their formal investigation, Sarah's exit strategy became her indictment. Julian Thorne, ever the pragmatist, threw her under the bus to save his own license, claiming he was manipulated by an ambitious junior associate. The last time I saw her was in a sterile conference room. She looked diminished. The fire that had once drawn me to her was extinguished, replaced by a hollow, flickering exhaustion. She had lost her license to practice law for 5 years and had been ordered to pay back every cent she had funneled into her mother's accounts. She didn't look at me as she signed the final papers. She just stared at the mahogany table, not the one I built, but a cold, mass-produced one in a building full of people who didn't know her name. I walked out of that building into the autumn air, and for the first time in a decade, my shoulders didn't ache. The weight of being someone else's foundation was gone. I didn't keep the house. It held too many ghosts of a life that was never actually mine. I sold it, paid off the debt Sarah had tried to saddle me with, and used the remaining equity to start my own small structural consultancy. I work out of a modest office now, one with windows that overlook the river. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself thinking about those early years. The diner, the broken heater, the shared dreams. I used to think I was a victim of a master manipulator, but with time and reflection, I've realized something harder to swallow. I wanted to be her hero so badly that I ignored the cracks in the foundation while I was still pouring the concrete. I loved a version of her that didn't exist, and in doing so, I let the real Sarah disappear into her own ambition. I still build things, but now I check the soil before I start. I look for honesty in the materials. I've learned that a partnership isn't about one person being the floor and the other being the star. It's about 2 people building a roof together so they can both stay dry when the storm hits. The bridge I was working on that day at the construction site is finished now. I drove across it last week. It's strong, it's steady, and it carries thousands of people toward their own futures every single day. As I reached the other side, I realized I wasn't looking in the rearview mirror anymore. I was looking at the road ahead. I spent 10 years building a dream for a woman that didn't exist. Now I'm building a reality for the man who does. Looking back, I don't regret the work I put in, but I regret who I gave it to. We often think that sacrifice is the highest form of love, but sometimes it's just a way of hiding from the truth. If someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Don't wait until you find their exit strategy. Would you have stayed and tried to fix things, or would you have walked away the moment you saw that folder? Tell me in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us tell more stories about the human heart, the lessons we learn, and the strength we find in the ruins. Thank you for listening.